Welcome everybody from Switzerland. So I'm in Zurich. Yes, so I want to talk about platforms, specifically API platforms, but really more about the whole platform space that in my mind really has taken off quite a bit in the last year or 1.5 years. It really has gained quite a bit of momentum. And I want to talk a little bit about what it is, why it matters, and also how to get involved a little bit, how to get started, and why it actually makes sense for, I think, pretty much anybody to look into that. Okay. Very briefly, and Dan already talked about that. So about myself, my name is Erik Wilde. I worked for a variety of software companies for a little while, and now I work for InnoQ, which is a smallish German-Swiss software consultancy. I also work as a OAI ambassador for the Open API initiative. I help them to evangelize Open API in the community. And if you want to find me, you can find me mostly on LinkedIn and YouTube. And as Dan said, if you're interested in APIs, check out my YouTube channel. It's called Getting APIs to Work. I try to create interesting videos and talk about things that matter in the API space and just point to interesting things here and there. So sometimes maybe it's good to just look at that for inspiration. Okay, now let's move on to the topic that I want to talk about, which is platforms. So what are platforms, right? So first, there's one sentence that I'm really proud of because I came up with it. And it's, you cannot not build a platform. And when I'll talk about platforms, you'll learn a little bit more what I mean by it. But literally, right, if you think about it, like a platform is something that you build stuff on. So everybody has a platform. That means that if you are building things with APIs or you are building APIs, you are either using a platform or you are contributing to a platform. It may not be a very organized effort and you may not think of it that way, but it is, right? If everybody uses your things or you use other things, there are certain ways how you use them, and that can be better or not so good. Maybe what you see here is a maybe not so good platform that carries some pretty valuable things. And what I want to encourage everybody is to think about platforms and also to think about that you cannot not build a platform, right? Whether you think you're doing it or not, I guarantee you're doing it, and maybe you want to do it a little bit better. So we'll look into what that can mean today. And of course, platform is a very fuzzy term. And I have a much longer piece where I just talk about the different ways that you can look at the term platform. But for this talk, very briefly, I want to distinguish the following things. So one thing that you can talk about is a platform business. This is what you probably know from Uber or Airbnb and these kind of businesses where the business model is being a platform, right? The business model of Uber is not to drive people around. It is to connect drivers to people who want to be driven around. And that makes it very scalable and very valuable. So that's an interesting thing, but it's not the kind of platform we're talking about. So let's move on. Business platform is a term that people sometimes use that in my mind is never very well defined. If you ask them, okay, you told me you want to build a platform, a business platform. What exactly do you mean by that? Often there's a lot of hand waving that ensues. So I don't really know what a business platform is other than it's kind of a platformish thing. But often it involves at least one of the two other things that I think are more well defined in the platform space. So an API platform oftentimes is what nowadays many people might call an API portal or an API marketplace or one of those things where you just go and you can find APIs. So in the end, it's a set of APIs that you can work with, where you can discover APIs, where you can learn about them, where you can learn about how to use them, where you can maybe subscribe to them, and then you can start using them. So it's a place to go if you're an API consumer, so to speak. And a lot of companies, at least bigger ones now, are trying to build up their own, at least internal API platforms, which is very clearly shown by the emergence of quite a number of companies in the API portal space that now try to kind of sell this kind of service. And then the last kind of platform that you can also look at is a developer platform. So a developer platform is more than just an API platform. So an API platform basically oftentimes is for people who want to consume APIs. Right? I want to build something, and for building that, I want to consume some APIs, and I find those in the API platform. A developer platform, on the other hand, is also for people who want to build new things, which hopefully then will expose APIs, but that's not so much the focus. The focus mostly is that if I'm building software, the developer platform should be something that supports me by giving me whatever is necessary basically to make me more effective as a developer. And that, of course, oftentimes are things such as development environments. It may be CI/CD pipelines. It also may be some kind of testing tools to test against guidelines, something that Bill was talking about. And it's all this stuff basically that takes certain things away from developers who don't have to worry about that anymore, but instead it's kind of being pushed down into the platform. Right? And developer platforms nowadays are very, very popular. And they are the space where the term platform engineering kind of emerged, I would say, with this idea of, well, a developer platform should not just kind of emerge, but it actually should be a conscious process to think about what do we need, what can we do to help our developers in the best possible way. Right? And I think it's really interesting to look at that, and also to look at maybe where you are in your path from, let's say, a little bit less mature organization to maybe a more mature organization. So let's look at that. So when you look at like the natural progression of many things, among them APIs and organizations, then you could easily say that there is this starting phase where organizations kind of discover new things, and oftentimes it's this kind of innovation that happens in pockets, right? So certain teams figure out things and start playing around with them, and they use them and they do interesting things, and it becomes interesting. And that's oftentimes very kind of innovative what they do, and there's not really established tooling around it. So teams just do stuff here and there, right? It also means that sometimes maybe they don't do things that maybe they should be doing, such as, for example, securing APIs, right? So over time, after a little while, you realize that we have many teams doing the same thing over and over again. How can we do this better? And then you're in this phase where APIs or other technologies going through this cycle are gaining momentum, right? So there are certain factors that drive this into something that becomes more popular in your organization. It also means that you expose yourself to more risk, because now more teams are building APIs because they've heard maybe that helps. It helps others to use their services more easily. So more teams want to do that. That also means now you have a higher risk because you have more and more APIs that are getting published. That means that you can now start looking at what do they need, what kind of repetitive work are they doing, so that I can help them best to get their stuff done, and I can provide them with a platform, right, where they can build on, which helps them and also maybe helps me when I want to have certain forms of governance, for example, for securing things. And then we're at the stage where I think where we are right now, where at least those organizations being more at the forefront of this are now really scaling up this stuff, and they realize that, oh, we're building more and more and more and more APIs. How can we better scale this effort? And this is where platform engineering then really kicks in, where it becomes very valuable for an organization, right? If you have 100 teams building APIs, it becomes very valuable to think about how can I make these 100 teams more effective? Because if you can reduce the number of working days they have to spend with stuff that they really shouldn't have to do, then, well, you get that amount of days times 100, right? So that's good. And it also becomes something where if you realize something happens more and more, then you probably want to manage that so that the risk is getting reduced, because like Bill said, for example, right, this idea of API sprawl, more and more organizations are experiencing that. And now they start realizing that, maybe we should do something about it. And building a platform, and I'll talk more about how to do it at the end, right? And really turning that into a conscious effort, that is something that a lot of organizations are looking at right now. And in my mind, that's the main reason why we see platform engineering taking off in such a big way. And one thing that I want to talk about a little bit, because I really like the way they approach it, and it's something where you can think of what I said. In the end, everybody has a platform, right? Your engineers are working with tools and they're using certain things and are doing certain things, and that's their platform. And maybe nobody gave it to them. It's just like what they used to do. But there is something in place, so to speak, right? It may be something that's not a very planned thing, but it is a set of practices and patterns and technologies and tools that determine how much effort it takes them, how good of a job they can do, how effective they are, and how much time they spend with tasks that ideally maybe they really shouldn't be spending time with. So you can think of how can we improve this? And that is where I think there's a really interesting thing that has been developed by CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And that's the Platform Engineering Maturity Model. And I just want to walk you through that a little bit, because I think it is really interesting to just look at what does platform engineering, so to speak, really entail, or what does a platform actually entail? This is their model. I highly encourage you to check it out. My slides are online. You can find them, and my slides are all interlinked. So if you go to my slides, you can actually click on here and you will get to the actual model and the paper. It's all nicely interlinked. I'm very proud of my web-based slides, as you may be able to tell. And this paper, so I've taken that from their paper on the Platform Engineering Maturity Model. The paper is only 12 pages, I think, and I highly encourage everybody to really read through it. But I just want to give you a few kind of nice key points from there. So they say there are 5 aspects to platform engineering. One is investment, basically. How does this whole thing even get to fly, right? Is there a funding model? Does anybody feel the need to build something that can be reused by others? Or is that something that just happens accidentally? So that oftentimes is one of the big problems in the beginning. It's like, who's funding a platform, right? If a platform is not really part of any in specific project, so to speak, right? It should help everybody. But if it should help everybody, who's funding it, right? So if there is no strategic understanding of the potential value, oftentimes these funding problems can be pretty hard in the beginning. Next thing is adoption. So the question of, well, if we build something, will people actually use it, right? And that sometimes in the beginning is a little bit harder, because you have to evangelize internally and explain people, look, we have this wonderful thing over here. If you start using it, it'll help you. And it'll take some while for people to understand it. Also, if your platform becomes better, right, it will become more attractive to use it because it helps developers more. So it also is a question of how far your platform building has advanced. And the more it has advanced, the easier it actually is to get adopted, because it will be a better platform. The next one is the question of interfaces. So how easy is it for people to actually consume that, right? So how easy is it built into their workflow? How easy is it to find? How easy is it to integrate with things they have to do otherwise? So that's kind of a little bit of the engineering aspect of the platform into what others have to do on top of the platform. The next one is the operational aspect. So how well is the platform actually kind of operated, right? If something breaks in the platform, if something needs to be fixed, patched, whatever, what's the model there, right? It's the same kind of, it's also a funding problem, right? It's like, are there people who actually are in charge of making sure this thing is always there? Because we have now more and more teams depending on it, so it probably should be reliable. But again, that's something that somebody needs to do. And then the last bit is measurement. This whole idea of, well, if we're now starting to spend some money for a platform, maybe we should be able to justify that and create some numbers and understand how many people are using it, how many people are not using it, maybe how much time on average or something like this were we able to save, these kind of things, right? So Is it something where also we can improve our platform because we see that certain things are more popular than others? So why is nobody using that, even though we thought that's a great feature? That's where in the end you want to go towards like platform as a product things, but that's like a little bit further out. But so these are the aspects of the platform. And the thing that I really like about the maturity model is that they have this idea that everybody has a platform, right? Like I said, you cannot not have a platform or build a platform. So they say the starting level is basically always provisional, right? So there are certain things that are happening. So people kind of invest in tooling, but maybe they just build it for themselves and they don't care whether it helps somebody else. If something gets adopted, it's more accidental than anything else. It's just like some team discovers that, hey, there's something over there, let's use it, but there's no conscious effort to really get this done. So for all of these things, there are provisional levels. And also for all of these things, there are optimizing levels. So there are 4 levels. I'll show the 2 in between in a minute. But this is kind of the nirvana, right? This is if everything is perfect, this is how it works, right? So like this is the highest level you can get to. But what the maturity model also very clearly says, and this is what I really like about it, is that it says there are levels in between. They're called operational and scalable. And the goal shouldn't be to be at the maximum level because that's very expensive, right? It only makes sense when you're Google or Netflix or like one of these really large companies where economies of scale basically drown out everything else. And you can really, really invest in the platform because, you know, we're a tech company. We have really good engineers. We have many, 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 many teams. So whatever we do to improve the platform, we will get back tenfold, right? But a lot of companies are not that. So the point of the maturity model then is twofold. So the first one is figure out where you are. So find out for each of the aspects where you are in that, in those 4 levels. And then also figure out where do you think you should be, right? So given the size of your company and the kind of digital maturity that you have, how quickly do you need to change things? How many teams do you have working on things? How important is it that you can fix things in between, like within like a day or so, right? So figure out where you want to be in relation to who you are as an organization, right? And then basically figure out the steps how to get from where you are to where you want to be. And I think that's the real value in my mind from this for this model, is to give you a little bit of this navigational help to understand these are the things that we should look at. These are the aspects that matter. Let's look at how well we're doing. Then let's think about, should we do better? Would it be good for us if we did better? And then we can think about how to improve on those points, right? And say, hey, adoption is really bad. Maybe we should do more evangelization or similar things. And it's really hard to kind of skip these levels. So one of the interesting things, for example, you can look at is to say, let's look at the adoption aspect. So for the adoption aspect, we have these 4 levels: provisional, operational, scalable, and optimizing. And what's interesting there to see, and I talked about that a little bit, is that once your maturity grows and your platform becomes better, push becomes pull, meaning that you don't really have to tell people so much, hey, you really should be using our platform. But instead, people want to start using it because they see that others are using it. They see what the value they can get out of it. They see that they get certain things much easier done, right? So for example, if they use the platform, all the security reviews get much easier because they don't have to pass as many tests and kind of gates that they have to pass through because the platform has a lot of the security stuff baked in, right? So it's all these things where over time, you'll see that if you improve things, you can actually make progress, but it's always kind of step by step. And you also have to figure out like where you want to be and how much you want to invest in the end, right? That's definitely also a question of how much do you actually want to spend in terms of effort and resources for that. Okay, so that's the general idea of the platform engineering maturity model. And now, one last thing about that model, right, is that I think it's actually super useful for all kinds of things. It's super useful for end users, because if you're building APIs, it allows you to better understand, are we building APIs effectively? Or are we just spending too much effort repetitively doing things in various teams that we could push into the platform, right? So it gives you, I think, a really good starting point to think about effectivity and how you want to function as an organization. For vendors, this model always, I think, is also very interesting, because they can more easily understand where does their tool fit in, right? So if you, for example, have a certain testing tool or a certain tool that secures API or a tool that finds unmanaged APIs or these kind of things, right? You can much more easily say, well, we're actually good for companies who are in that level, in that aspect, and want to move forward to the other level, right? They want to advance and we can help. And if you can take that and then you have a easier way explaining the value that your tool brings, and also targeting the right customers or prospects where you can say, okay, and this is where a tool can really help. And finally, this is how I actually got to this model, right? Is that consultants. So if you help companies with their API practices, I think this is also just a very useful framework to take and say, hey, let's have a look. Where do you stand? And then let's talk about where you want to be. And then let's talk about how you get from where you stand to where you want to be. And that also gives you a little bit of a kind of a framework to work with as a consultant, which is always nice if you don't have to invent everything, but you can actually say, look, there is this framework, people like it. It was created with a lot of input from the community. Let's just use that and apply it to you. Okay. And the last thing that I want to do is very briefly just tell you a little bit how that works specifically for platforms. So one of the patterns we've seen for API platforms, one of the things we've seen in the last couple of years, I would say, is this pattern that originally we had this idea of tech providers in the API space just providing basically these gateways, securing APIs, right? So that was kind of the main function of the initial crop of API gateways, was to say, if you're an API provider, you put in a gateway to secure the API and do some other things. And that's the main function that a gateway will have. What we see nowadays is actually that more and more organizations are moving to this idea where they start thinking about, well, we may have 1, 2, or 3 gateways, and it actually shouldn't matter that much. What really matters is that we have this platform, because this platform is what creates value. And this platform should have this unified view of all the APIs that we have and manage. And that should be an API catalog, right? And this is what, for example, Gartner calls that federated API management. And it's this general trend that the API space becomes more diverse, that it's not so much you just put in one giant API gateway and declare victory, but instead you have to think about, in particular as a larger organization, how can you do that in a little bit more decentralized way and still be able to create that API platform where you can say, look, these APIs are all the APIs we have. Some of them are secured through gateway A, others through gateway B, others through gateway C, but they're all secured, so we're happy. And now people can use them. And now the last thing that we also see happening is that we see more and more offerings in the space of marketplaces or portals or whatever you might call them, which are these components that then would take the APIs that you have collected, which are kind of your portfolio of APIs, and then push them out to consumers in whatever form works best for them, right? And you can have multiple ones, one for partners, one for the public, one for your internal developers. So there can be different flavors of that. But if you structure your API management that way, like the technical level and then the product level and then kind of the marketing level, I would call it really marketing, then I think you are at a good point to move towards a more unified way of how you can manage your APIs, and then also how you can turn your APIs into those things that are part of your platform, right? And I would say that really this platform stuff is here to stay. And that was my main mission. That was really all that I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what platform engineering is, why I think it matters also for the API space a lot, where you have to think about, okay, who are the different consumers for my APIs? But I have different APIs from different places maybe, but they should all be able to consume the same APIs. You shouldn't make any assumptions about consumption for people, but you should just be able to say, here are all the APIs, use them however you like, right? And those really should be perceived as business capabilities that you can then publish out to consumers and do that in whatever way works best. So in summary, what I would like to leave you with is basically just platform engineering is a thing and you're doing it. Maybe you don't think you're doing it, but you're doing it. And if you don't think you're doing it, you're probably not doing it in the best possible way. So I really would like to encourage you to check out this platform engineering maturity model. It's a short read, and it just gives you, I think, a good frame of mind how maybe you will be able to improve the effectiveness of how you're building and managing APIs. And with that, I am done. Thank you very much. And as Dan said, if you're interested in API stuff, please check out my YouTube channel or my LinkedIn, and the slides are online at this address.
Yeah, definitely recommend you do that. Super interesting conversation here, Erik. That I think it was maybe 2-3 slides ago where you showed that sort of schematic with the gateways and the providers and all that kind of thing. I kept waiting for the box to appear that says, and here's your platform, right? But
well, it's all of it. All of this
everything.
is your platform.
The whole thing is the platform.
The whole thing is the platform. Yeah, in that case, that is the platform, right? The platform is basically where you possibly create new APIs. Various teams create new APIs. They want to be able to publish those and to secure those, right? Then they can push them into the catalog, and then they become part of the offering that everybody else can consume. So this is a little bit, you could say that's a little bit of the life cycle, so to speak, that things go through from being published by teams to being discoverable.
Yeah, perfect. Go back to your last slide. I want to make sure people can see your YouTube and your LinkedIn.
This is the end.
This is the end of this talk, but hopefully the beginning of a new vein of learning for all our folks here. Erik, thanks, man, for being here and being part of it. You were one of the first people I reached out, and really grateful that you were willing to be part of AppySecCon #1.
Yes.
So, and hopefully many more to come. So I'm gonna pull you off the stage here because we got